Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Ahnaf, and good evening from Israel. Well, after last week's budget was passed, after part of the judicial reform, long-standing judicial reform, was passed through the Knesset, the firing of Shin Bet head Ronen Bar, and the starting of the process of firing the Attorney General, a long thorn in the side of this government. One would think that this would be a quieter week for Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu. Perhaps there could be a focus on many other issues and arenas. But no, it's actually been a very difficult week for the Prime Minister for a number of reasons. I'll go through two of the key moments during the week. First of all, really relatively unbelievably, in the middle of the final stages of Prime Minister Netanyahu's testimony in the three, as we know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is standing trial on three cases against him. Case 1000, 2000, and 4000. The most significant one is coming to an end, case 4000, and so Netanyahu should be finishing up his testimony relatively soon. But remarkably, in the middle of the court, suddenly there was a lot of noise, and Netanyahu's lawyer left the courtroom, which caused a lot of consternation and analysis and wondering what happened. Apparently, at that time, two of Netanyahu's advisors were being arrested. One of them, Eli Feldstein, was arrested for having and then passing on classified documents to journalists and other problematic things. And Yonatan Urich, who is really one of, in probably Netanyahu's closest circle, a real close political advisor, someone who designs a lot of the Prime Minister's communications, was also arrested around the same time. The charges against them are basically that they took money, or they were involved with Feldstein. It now seems that there's very little doubt about it. Again, I'm only going by what I've read, that he was paid while he was in the Prime Minister's office. Again, neither of them were Prime Minister's office employees. Feldstein, because he failed a security test to be able to serve in the Prime Minister's office. Obviously, anyone who officially serves in such a high and sensitive position has to pass a security clearing, which he failed. But they were paid by other individuals, other organizations. Feldstein, it comes out that he was paid by a lobbyist for Qatar. There's obviously a debate what he did while he was being paid. Did he know? How much did he push for a positive reception for Qatar? Urich was apparently also connected in some way. Again, these are the allegations to Qatar, receiving money. Some say to help Qatar's image during the World Cup. Which seems interesting considering he doesn't really, to the best of my knowledge, have too much international presence or experience, and some even say he doesn't even have that good English. So the fact is that they were arrested, which led to Netanyahu's lawyer just walking out of court, or maybe even running out of court in the middle of one of the most important parts of the Netanyahu case. Netanyahu himself, even more remarkably, was himself called into question a day later to find out exactly what he knew, how he was involved, What we've since learned is that there was WhatsApp groups with the Qatar lobbyists, with not just those two, but other Netanyahu confidants, who basically talked through some of the dealings and through some of the things that they were going to be working on. So it's clear that this wasn't an accident. It's clear that there's something going on here, again, according to what is being released. And the big question everybody's asking today is, did Netanyahu know what was going on? Because that is a question which everyone would obviously want to know. Netanyahu himself has denied that he knew any of this. The question then is asked, if he didn't know, isn't that negligence? The fact that he had two people around him, maybe more, maybe less, maybe it was only one, who were actually receiving money from Qatar while they were working in his office and spreading documents and spreading talking points, communications, etc. And that also speaks to perhaps how much in charge Netanyahu really is. Netanyahu for many years has built his sort of success on being the one in charge, on being in control, making the difficult decisions at all times. Well, this certainly, puts a blot on that particular persona. The second major event that affected Netanyahu this week is after firing Ronen Bar, as I spoke last week, while the court did accept that that Netanyahu could look for a replacement for Ronen Bar, they said that they still have to have a hearing to decide whether Ronen Bar could actually be fired in the first place. Well, Netanyahu finally found someone. He nominated Eli Shavit, a former senior person in Israel's Navy. A lot of people are scratching their heads because he's very much outside of the Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence services sort of remit, outside of that circle. It's like the chief of staff. Netanyahu wanted someone outside of the infrastructure, someone who couldn't be blamed in any way for what happened on October 7th. But really, this name came out of nowhere. And Netanyahu played up his qualifications for the position and said he's the right person at the right time. Embarrassingly, 24 hours later, the same Netanyahu had to rescind the offer or the nomination of Eli Shavit, probably, I would argue, mostly because of recriminations within the Likud party and other parts of the government. It appears that Eli Shavit, at least at one point, took part in demonstrations against the government, probably, to my understanding, it was before the war, during the judicial reform, demonstrations against the judicial reform, and there was certainly a lot of pushback. A lot of people asking, well, why didn't Netanyahu know about this? Why didn't he look more carefully? Perhaps he should have looked more carefully, especially as he's trying to claim that he let Ronen Bar go because of a lack of trust, because the two couldn't work together. So one would think that Netanyahu would spend a little bit more time, this is what some was suggesting, on looking into Eli Shavit's past. What basically Netanyahu and his circle blamed the rescinded appointment on the US government coming out against the appointment. Senator Lindsey Graham came out and said it would be impossible for someone in such a sensitive position to be an opponent of the Trump administration, because apparently Shavit had written an article, as someone very involved in climate issues, he wrote an article against the Trump administration on climate issues. A lot of people aren't buying this. A lot of analysts and commentators are basically saying that was concocted to give Netanyahu an easy out, after a lot of his fellow Likud ministers and advisors were saying, we can't appoint this guy Shavit if he's an opponent of this government and he'll cause us problems. So the easiest thing to do would say that we felt pressure from the American government. A lot of people are not buying that necessarily in Israel, but again, it was an embarrassing walk back for Netanyahu. It was and a second or even third embarrassing moment for Netanyahu this week. And they started to be, perhaps arguably for the first time, opposition figures who have always disliked Netanyahu for various reasons, and now putting charges against him that his behavior is erratic, It's paranoid. It's not thinking things through properly. It's not being aware of what's going on around him, and then basically attacking everybody else. This is possibly a chink in the armor of a person who considers himself, always controlled, Mr. Security, Mr. Thinking things through, strategic, not just, making decisions off the cuff. So we'll see if those hits make a difference in any upcoming polls. Netanyahu himself, as of, I think it's tonight or today, is off to Hungary. Hungary was, I believe, the first country in Europe, certainly, which said after the ICC prosecutor put out an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, said that he would be welcome at any time. He will receive a very warm and friendly welcome from Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister in Hungary. What, again, a lot of people are finding fault in this trip is the fact that he's staying from Wednesday all the way through to Sunday, when really Hungary, there aren't that many things that Israel is doing with Hungary at this point. So why, in the middle of a war with everything else that's going on, why does he need so many days away? On the war itself, the war in Gaza certainly moving up a notch. The IDF is not just in the south, but also in the north of the Gaza Strip. They've created a perimeter around, a secure perimeter to make sure that no one can come through. There was an attempt by an armed Hamas militant to try and enter that zone today. He was armed with a gun and who knows what else, and he was killed. But Israel has to remain vigilant. There were a number of rockets over the last few days from Gaza. We haven't seen probably so many rockets and drones, etc., coming out from Gaza for quite a while. But Israel is certainly making headway. It is said in the next few days, Israel, the IDF, will hold up to 30% of the Gaza Strip. It has created a second barrier beyond the Philadelphia crossing called the Morag crossing, which will separate Rafah from a lot of the rest of the Gaza Strip to ensure that Hamas are not able to rearm and reestablish itself. Hamas itself, there are a lot of suggestions that perhaps it's starting to lose its grip. We talked about the protests last week. They died down the early part of the week, but they came back with force today. There was an interesting event when a young Palestinian was killed by a Hamas policeman. Apparently he was lining up for food at one point. I don't know exactly what happened, but he was shot dead. The members of the clan of that young man then went and took the policeman and executed him at point blank range. The sort of thing that Hamas would certainly not have stood for pre-October 7th or pre the war against them. But now they're trying to calm things down. They understand that they can't afford to look weak. They can't afford a sort of a clan battle or battle against. And let's not forget, some of the clans in Gaza are well armed themselves. But the fact that this is happening, the fact that Hamas haven't really got their so-called retribution from the clan's retribution, perhaps speaks to some weakness. Again, the demonstrations speak to some level of weakness. UNRWA station was rampaged yesterday or today, and hundreds of bags of flour were stolen without too much control of Hamas or reaction from Hamas. There are those who say that since Israel has restarted the war, they've gone back into their tunnels. And again, I state, which I've mentioned a few times before, a lot of the new recruits from Hamas, because they were decimated before the last ceasefire, are now young, inexperienced, young men who really were just given a uniform and a rifle, I'm sure paid a certain amount of money. So these are not the experienced soldiers that Hamas had before the war. A few other more regional events. Within Israel, there's a lot of talk about Turkey at the moment. We've seen the demonstrations against Erdogan after the arrest of a popular opposition figure who was removed from the upcoming electoral ballot, probably to try and persuade his people. Erdogan has again ratcheted up. the attacks on Israel this week in a speech during Eid al-Fitr, the end of Ramadan. He basically called for Israel to be destroyed. That's going much farther than he ever has before. Yes, there's been lots of attacks and criticisms, inflaming situations, even incitement, usually against Prime Minister Netanyahu, but to actually pray that Allah, God, will destroy Israel is really unprecedented, and something which has caused a lot of consternation within Israel. And there have even been voices that have said we should be more worried about Turkey than even Iran. Let's not forget Turkey is a member of NATO. It's a stronger country, a stronger economy, and the situation in Syria, Turkey is getting a very important foothold. It is going to be building bases within northern Syria, and that's causing a lot of concern in Israel. Because at the moment they pretty much have free reign. Even tonight, Israel bombed military targets within Syria. But if the Turks are able to build bases and have their early warning systems and their defensive systems, then that will certainly cause a lot of problems to Israel over Syria, or if it wants to travel through Syria to pastures beyond. Talking of which, there seems to be a major US buildup in the region. As we know, the US has been pounding the Houthis in Yemen for a number of weeks now. But there is great concern in Tehran that this is all part of preparations for possible strike on the country, whether it's US-led, whether it's Israel-led, whether it's a partnership. There is a lot of noise. There seems to be a lot of activity in the region. And the Ayatollahs are certainly worried. They were speaking to their Russian partners tonight after, for many weeks or even months, they've been saying that there are no negotiations. We do not negotiate with the US, etc., etc. They're starting to climb down their ladder a little bit, perhaps because they realize what is now facing them with all this major military buildup forces in the region, and some military maneuvers involving Israel and some other countries. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that. It does seem like things are ratcheting up. It could be a way to get Iran back to the negotiating table, or it could be that really something is being planned. We'll have to wait and see. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashley. I will, excuse me, I will begin with a question from Barak Korkmaz, who asks, do you expect an operation against Iran on Friday or early Saturday? If yes, what would the repercussions on Israel be?
If I knew a date like that, I certainly wouldn't be saying, and I can tell you I do not know any of the military plans of the IDF. As I said, it does seem like things are happening. It does seem that there are at least preparations for something to happen. Again, it could be to strong arm Iran back into negotiations. At the moment, it doesn't seem like they accept negotiations, and it could be that President Trump's patience has finally worn out, and they see what they're able to do in Yemen, and they see what's happened in Syria and Lebanon, Hamas and the Palestinian theater. Iran is at its weakest. There is a window of opportunity. Israel also took out many of Iran's defensive missile systems, most important ones, especially around sites associated with the nuclear program. So one could suggest that this is a window. It won't be open forever because Iran is trying as hard as possible to replenish some of its missiles. It's not able to make as many ballistic missiles as it was before the Israeli attacks. So again, I don't know. I'm not privy to these kind of discussions, but it would certainly be messy. Iran is still a country with a lot of missiles, a lot of weaponry. They've threatened British bases, US bases, and other interests in the region should they be targeted. But it would certainly seem that President Trump, at least from the language on his social media accounts, is certainly losing, if not lost, patience with the Iranian Ayatollahs at this point.
Now, in the event that the United States and or Israel does launch a strike on Iran, how do you expect Russia might respond to that?
Well, Russia is obviously very busy in Ukraine. At the moment, the relations between the US and Russia are thawing since President Trump returned to the White House. So I'm not sure that this would be the time for Russia to be openly associated with any response. While Iran is an important ally to Russia, they have far bigger fish to fry. They want to get as much as they can at the negotiating table with Ukraine, the US-led negotiating table with Ukraine. So I'm not sure exactly how far they would go. Behind the scenes, it does seem that they're assisting them. They are taking their standpoint. Russia, I think their main aim at this point is to try and get Iran and the US back to the negotiating table. That's what the message coming out of Moscow today seems to be.
Thank you. Now I will turn to a question from Larry Greenberg, who asks, it has been said that 70% of Israelis would pay any price, including letting Hamas survive, for the release of the remaining hostages. Is this true nationally outside the Haaretz clique?
Um, I think I've said this a few times. Israeli polls are notoriously, I don't know if I would say untrustworthy, but there are certain pollsters, let's put it this way, that basically they ask you what results you want, and then they amend the questions accordingly. So, for example, just to sort of give an example in this very question, if I was to ask people, would you pay a high price to release the hostages? I'm sure you'd find 70, 80% who would say yes. If I asked you to return to the negotiating table, Hamas is demanding an end to a war, their maintenance of power in the Gaza Strip, and Israel would completely remove itself from there. Would you agree to that? I think you'd find maybe 20 to 30%. So, the devil is in the details. The key is in the question. I think Israelis would pay a very high price to get the hostages back. Would it pay really for an end of war, leaving Hamas in power in Gaza, allowing the international community to basically pay for the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip, and we know where the money would go, and allow itself to rearm, reestablish itself, and perhaps threaten another October 7th even greater again in the future. I'm not sure how many Israelis would really want that. As I say to people, it's probably an argument between the head and the heart. The head says Israel has to conquer and defeat Hamas and do everything that needs to be done there. The heart says that there are still a few dozen Israelis who are suffering, and we're hearing more and more every night. There's former hostages who are coming out and saying exactly what was going on, the torture that they went through, the suffering they went through, the abuse, sexual, mental, psychological, physical. It's heart-rending, and Israelis see this and hear this and look at some of these hostages and see their own family members. So that plays into the heart. So I'm not sure. It's very difficult to say 70% of this, 70% of that. Yes, there are polls that I've seen that show one way, and then on another news channel shows something completely opposite. I think Israelis are conflicted. I think that's the bottom line. It's a complex issue, and again, how you word it and how you're feeling at the particular moment in time affects how you respond to any particular poll.
All right, thank you. Now, Stephen Miller asks, please update on the status of the hostage negotiations.
Well, at the moment, they're at an impasse. There are no high-level negotiations, which means that there's nothing really happening. Hamas apparently are being flexible on many issues, but at the end of the day, the one sticking point which they're not being flexible on is that they want to move to phase two, which would lead to an end of the war, to removal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip, every last centimeter, and the rehabilitation of the Strip. Those are the pretty much bottom line points for Hamas and have been since the beginning of the war. So whereas they're being more flexible about how many hostages they may release up front, that's really for them that's the central point of the negotiations. And this Israeli government, probably any Israeli government, cannot negotiate on those points. So at the moment, they're not moving. Defense Minister Yisrael Katz has stated that the entry into of the IDF into the Gaza Strip in such a massive way is largely to pressure Hamas back to the negotiating table. At the moment, it's not happened, but there appears to be plans to push the IDF presence further into the Gaza Strip in greater numbers. So we'll see if that has more of an effect.
Thank you. Now, Alexander Bruner asks, will Bibi be able to survive as prime minister until October 2026?
Well, if he does, he'll be the first prime minister in the history. He'll be the first government in the history of the state of Israel to completely see out his term. And doing that during a war, or during one of the greatest disasters in Israeli history, would be quite an achievement, politically speaking. He's probably gained himself from passing the budget and some of the other political maneuvers we've seen over the last week, adding another minister to the government, moving this person around, that person around. He's certainly given himself quite a large breathing space, as I said. Even though there are all these other problems going on around, none of them are really affecting his position or the government majority. And that will be true at least for the next few months. The major threat that's always been there, but again, it's a threat to a certain extent, is the issue of the enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox. That's one threat, which, again, at the moment has been lessened with the leverage of the ultra-Orthodox parties, certainly minimalized after the budget. The other one is if they do go for some sort of negotiations and some of the right-wing members or more right-wing members of this government, like Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir, feel that they're giving away too much, compromising too much, then that could also be a problem for Netanyahu. But at the moment, he doesn't seem to have to make too many major decisions on either of these tracks for the moment. The Knesset is off this week, and we've got the Passover holiday next week, and that goes on for weeks. So he's got a good few weeks respite at the moment. But even so, then you just go back for the summer session, which is a relatively short one, and then we have the summer and then the Jewish holidays. So there's not too many problematic hurdles ahead. But again, there's a lot of things that can happen in Israeli politics from today until tomorrow. But certainly if he looks ahead and looks at the calendar, Netanyahu will be allowed to give himself a bit of a breather politically.
All right, thank you. Now, an anonymous attendee would like to ask, what is the status of Bibi's attempt to fire the Attorney General?
Well, it's gone through the first stage, as I said last week. It's still very, very early. It has to go through a lot of hurdles, a lot of different stages. But that was one of the demands, especially from Itamar Ben-Gvir, and allowed him to return to the government and ensure that significant majority ahead of the budget vote. But it doesn't seem to be the most important thing on Netanyahu's agenda. He knows that will create even more anger than the firing of Ronen Bar. Ronen Bar, at the end of the day, most Israelis believe he should have gone because he was part of the failures surrounding the October 7th massacre. It's just the timing and the real reasons given that raised a lot of suspicions amongst certain sectors of Israeli society. But the firing of the Attorney General will be seen a far more red line. And whether Netanyahu needs to give another excuse for greater demonstrations, greater disunity, greater division within Israeli society at this point, I'm not so sure. He would certainly want to fire the Attorney General. She's causing him a lot of problems. But it doesn't seem like they're moving full throttle towards her dismissal at this point.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. We have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for the week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout over the weekend for our upcoming weekly podcast offering email. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the Middle East Forum's YouTube channel, where you can watch this series as well as over 400 of our previous podcast episodes. We thank you all again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.